I never thought I'd find myself in this situation, writing a story about how I ended up in prison for punishing my wife's lover. But he wasn't just a lover. There was something darker, more twisted. He didn't just ruin my life. His betrayal ran deeper than I ever imagined. But I'll get to that later. This is a story about falling, rising, and rebuilding a life from ashes. About how, years later, my wife begged me to take her back when she saw the man I'd become, a billionaire. And then, there was one final revenge, the kind that left her life in ruins. So, let's start from the beginning. There was a time when I thought I had it all. My life was a polished image of success, one that others envied. I had built my business from nothing, pouring sweat and sacrifice into every late night and early morning until it stood as proof of my hard work. A logistics company that thrived on my instinct for efficiency and growth. At 35, I was living the dream. The perfect family, a home that turned heads, and a reputation as a man who always delivered. Sophia was the kind of woman who made a man believe in fate. She was striking, dark eyes that seemed to see right through you, a confidence that could silence a room, and a sharp wit that always kept me on my toes. When we first met, I had been drawn to her like a moth to a flame. Marrying her felt like winning a prize I wasn't sure I deserved. Then there was Ethan. God, that boy lit up my world. At 6 years old, he was everything a father could want. Curious, sharp, and with this smile that could soften even the worst day. He was my motivation for everything I did, the reason I woke up every morning ready to grind harder than the day before. When I looked at him, I saw my legacy. But life has a way of hiding its cracks until it's too late. At first, the changes were subtle. Sophia started spending more time on her phone, a sly smile flickering on her lips as she texted. She'd started complaining about things she never used to notice. The way the house felt too small despite its 6 bedrooms, or how I worked too much, even though my long hours paid for everything we had. Her laughter, which once felt like a melody I couldn't get enough of, now sounded forced, like she was playing a part. I brushed it off. Every marriage has its ups and downs, I told myself. Maybe she just needed more attention, a vacation, or a new project to keep her engaged. I started coming home earlier, surprising her with flowers and booking dinner reservations at the kind of places that had waiting lists for weeks. But nothing I did seemed to reach her. Ethan noticed too, though he didn't have the words to describe it. He'd ask me why Mom didn't want to play board games anymore or why she always seemed busy. I would ruffle his hair and tell him not to worry. But inside, something cold started to creep in. It was on a rare quiet evening, as Sophia sat on the couch scrolling through her phone, that I realized how far apart we had drifted. She didn't look up when I walked in, didn't even acknowledge me. I stood there, watching her, wondering if the woman I'd married still existed beneath the mask she wore. I told myself I was imagining things, that I was reading too much into her distance. But deep down, something in me whispered that the life I thought I had was no longer real. I ignored it, for now. Routine has a way of lulling you into complacency. You tell yourself everything is fine, that the little things, the silences, the distance, the flicker of doubt in your gut, don't mean anything. That's where I was when everything began to unravel. Stuck in the rhythm of denial, blind to what lay beneath. It started with a simple doctor's visit. Ethan had caught one of those relentless winter colds that just wouldn't quit, and Sophia insisted we take him in for a checkup. She was always like that, meticulous, protective. I didn't argue. Anything to ease her mood. The doctor was one of those friendly types, always smiling, always chatting as he worked. Nothing serious, he said, scribbling notes on Ethan's chart. Just a little infection. A round of antibiotics and he'll be good as new. He paused, looking up at us. By the way, we ran a quick blood test to rule out anything more severe. Ethan's got type AB blood, which is a little uncommon but perfectly normal. You and your wife should know his blood type in case of emergencies. I nodded, filing it away as useful information. I didn't think much of it until we were driving home. Type up. Something about it didn't sit right. I couldn't shake the feeling as I replayed the doctor's words over and over in my head. Blood types weren't something I'd ever given much thought to, but in that moment, I felt an odd compulsion to look it up. Later that evening, after Ethan had gone to bed, I sat at the kitchen counter scrolling through my phone. I typed AB blood type inheritance into the search bar and read the results. My stomach dropped. For a child to have type AB blood, one parent must have type A and the other must have type B. I stared at the words, my chest tightening. I was type O. I knew that because it was on every medical form I'd filled out since college. Sophia was type A. I remembered because she always joked about how A positive matched her personality. My hand trembled as I set the phone down. It had to be a mistake. Maybe I misremembered her blood type, or the doctor had made an error. But the seed of doubt had already been planted, and it was spreading like wildfire. For the next few days, I watched Ethan more closely, searching for traces of myself in him. I told myself I was being paranoid, but each time I tried to find a connection. His smile, his laugh, the way he scrunched his nose when he was concentrating. I felt a deeper pull of doubt. Couldn't shake it. That's when I decided to get answers. Quietly, without telling Sophia, I ordered a home DNA testing kit. It arrived in an unassuming package, and I hid it in the office until the moment felt right. The opportunity came one Saturday morning. Sophia had gone to a yoga class, leaving Ethan and me to our usual father-son routine of cartoons and pancakes. I acted like nothing was wrong as we laughed at the antics on screen, but my heart was pounding. "Hey, buddy," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Can I swab the inside of your cheek for a little science experiment? It's for work." Ethan, curious as always, was happy to oblige. He opened his mouth and I quickly collected the sample, sealing it in the envelope before he could ask questions. The next few days were unbearable. Every moment of normalcy felt like a lie, every interaction with Sophia like a test of my composure. When the results finally arrived in my email, my hands shook as I opened them. The words were clinical, detached, but they might as well have been a bomb. Probability of paternity, 0%. I sat there staring at the screen, feeling like the ground had vanished beneath me. My son wasn't my son. And then the realization hit me like a sledgehammer. If he wasn't mine, he was someone else's. Someone Sophia had chosen over me. Got it. Here's the revised version of Part 3. The confrontation with fewer dialogues. The house felt oppressively quiet when I came home that night, clutching the DNA test results in my hand. Sophia was lounging in the living room, her face illuminated by the glow of her phone. She didn't even look up when I entered. For a moment, I stood there, watching her, the paper crumpling in my grip. I wasn't sure if I felt more anger or disbelief. I placed the paper on the coffee table and sat across from her, my movements deliberate, almost mechanical. She finally glanced up, her casual smile faltering when she saw my expression. The results stared up at us from the table, stark and undeniable. First, she brushed it off, claiming it must be a mistake. Her tone was defensive, her eyes darting anywhere but at me. But I pressed her, each pointed question slicing through her half-hearted denials. Her mask of composure slipped. The truth tumbled out in pieces, each fragment more damning than the last. Yes, there had been an affair. Yes, Marcus was Ethan's biological father. It hadn't been fleeting either. It lasted months, during a time she claimed to feel neglected while I worked to build the life she now enjoyed. Her voice softened as she tried to justify it, to reframe her betrayal as a moment of weakness rather than calculated deceit. She threw excuses like daggers, accusing me of being emotionally absent, of prioritizing my business over our marriage. Her words sounded hollow, desperate, as though she believed that if she could twist the narrative just enough, I might absolve her. But I saw her for who she was now, a woman willing to bury years of lies beneath shallow reasoning. She had let me love a child she knew wasn't mine. She had stood beside me all these years, knowing the truth would destroy me. And when it finally came to light, all she could offer was a plea to move past it, to pretend it didn't matter. I stared at her, stunned by the sheer audacity. My mind flashed to Ethan. His laughter, his wide-eyed curiosity, the way he looked up to me with trust and love. The thought of him twisted the knife even deeper. He was innocent in all of this, yet he would bear the brunt of her selfish choices. Sophia's voice faded into the background as I rose and walked out. The weight of her betrayal sat heavy on my chest. But it wasn't just the pain anymore. Anger simmered beneath the surface, cold and focused. I didn't know how or when, but I knew one thing with certainty. This wasn't over. In the days that followed, I felt like a stranger in my own skin. Betrayal seeped into every corner of my mind, leaving behind a cold emptiness I couldn't shake. Every memory I had of my family felt tainted now. Ethan's first steps, our family vacations, even the quiet nights at home. All of it was a lie built on Sophia's deception. I barely ate, barely slept. The anger was there, simmering just beneath the surface, but it couldn't overpower the heartbreak. I had spent years sacrificing, working, building a life for us, and in one fell swoop, she had ripped it all away. When I finally confided in my brother, Liam, it was late at night, and my voice felt foreign as I told him the story. The words tasted bitter, and even as I spoke, part of me wondered if saying it out loud would make it real. Liam was the only person I could trust. He was younger than me by 5 years, but he had always been grounded, fiercely loyal. As I told him everything, about Ethan, the DNA test, and Sophia's confession, his expression shifted from disbelief to rage. He didn't interrupt, didn't offer empty platitudes. When I finished, he just sat there, the weight of my words settling between us. Eventually, he asked the question I had been avoiding. "What are you going to do about it?" I didn't know. I felt paralyzed, caught between the love I still felt for Ethan and the fury I harbored toward Sophia and Marcus. But Liam wasn't one to let things lie. He pressed me, urging me to take control of the situation. That night, we started digging. Liam had always been good with computers, and within hours, he had pulled up information on Marcus that I hadn't even thought to look for. It turned out my old friend had secrets of his own. Shady business dealings, mounting debt, and a history of questionable relationships. The pieces began to fit together, and what emerged was a picture of a man who had been circling my life, waiting for the chance to take what was mine. Liam wasn't done. He pushed further, encouraging me to examine Sophia's actions more closely. It was painful, peeling back the layers of our life together. But the more I looked, the more I realized how calculated her betrayal had been. This wasn't just a moment of weakness. It was years of deceit, carefully orchestrated to maintain the illusion of a happy family. I started noticing patterns I had ignored before. The way she always seemed to know more about Marcus's life than casual conversation would explain. The odd familiarity between them at gatherings. The way she brushed off my questions about her past. With Liam's help, I pieced it all together. The affair hadn't been a fleeting mistake. It was a deliberate choice, one that spanned months while I was too busy building our future to notice. And then there was Ethan, my son, the boy I had raised, loved, and fought for. He was the one innocent thread in this entire web of lies, and the thought of him tore at me the most. How could I reconcile my love for him with the knowledge that he wasn't mine? That his existence was the result of the worst betrayal I had ever known? By the end of that week, I wasn't the same man. The heartbreak was still there, but it was buried now, swallowed by something sharper, colder. I didn't just want answers anymore, I wanted justice. Liam saw it too. He didn't try to talk me down, didn't tell me to let it go. He simply nodded, as if he already knew where this was headed. Together, we started planning. By the time the heartbreak dulled into something harder, more focused, I knew what I needed to do. Marcus had crossed a line that couldn't be forgiven. He wasn't just a man who betrayed his oldest friend. He was a parasite, someone who took without consequence, feeding off the trust of others. And Sophia? She had enabled it, played her part in twisting the knife. Couldn't let it stand. Liam was all in from the start. If my resolve wavered, his didn't. "We'll make him pay," he said simply, and I believed him. There was no dramatic speech, no hesitation. Just action. We started with Marcus's financials. Liam had always been good at finding what others wanted to hide. Within days, he uncovered a trail of shady business practices, unpaid debts, shell companies, and under-the-table deals that painted a clear picture of fraud. Marcus had been living far beyond his means, using other people's money to maintain the facade of success. Liam's findings only fueled my determination. I wasn't just going to expose him. I was going to dismantle everything he'd built. Piece by piece, I began collecting evidence methodically, treating it like the projects I used to manage in my business. I combed through old emails, text messages, and photos, piecing together a timeline that tied Marcus's indiscretions to Sophia's betrayal. The connections were sickening. Business trips that coincided with weekends Sophia claimed she was visiting friends. Receipts for dinners and hotels in cities where Marcus had been. It all fit too perfectly to be coincidence. But I needed more than circumstantial evidence to bring them down. So I took a calculated risk. Marcus was a creature of habit, always frequenting the same high-end bars and restaurants. One night I followed him. Not directly, Liam had found a contact who specialized in discreet surveillance, someone who could get close enough to gather the proof we needed. It didn't take long. Marcus had become careless, flaunting his wealth in ways that made him a target. Photos and video footage soon followed. Marcus meeting with questionable associates, exchanging envelopes that clearly weren't filled with tax documents. When Liam showed me the footage, I felt a grim satisfaction. Marcus wasn't just a fraud, he was sloppy. The next step was Sophia. As much as I hated her, I needed her to feel the fallout just as much as he would. It wasn't enough for her to lose my trust. She needed to lose the security she had taken for granted. I dug into our shared finances, tracing every dollar she had spent during the years of their affair. She hadn't just betrayed me emotionally. She had stolen from me, siphoning money into her personal accounts under the guise of household expenses. I kept my movements quiet, biding my time. The plan wasn't about brute force. It was about precision. I wanted to hit them where it hurt most. Their reputations, their comfort, their illusion of control. I filed anonymous tips with the financial authorities about Marcus's fraudulent dealings, ensuring they'd open an investigation that would drag his name through the mud. I sent select pieces of evidence to his business partners, detailing his theft and dishonesty in a way that left no doubt about his guilt. For Sophia, I took a different route. I leaked the records of her financial improprieties to our closest circle of friends, people she had carefully cultivated relationships with to maintain her image. It didn't take long for the whispers to start, for her polished reputation to crumble under the weight of her lies. The beauty of it all was that none of this could be traced back to me. Every piece of evidence, every action, was calculated to look like a natural consequence of their own greed and deceit. The first domino fell a week later. Marcus's biggest client pulled out of a lucrative deal after learning of his fraudulent practices. By the end of the month, his accounts were frozen, his business under investigation, and his name splashed across headlines as a con artist. Sophia didn't fare much better. The friends she had so carefully kept close turned on her, disgusted by what they learned. She went from being the center of every gathering to an outcast, her every move scrutinized. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt in control. I didn't just want revenge. I wanted them to feel the weight of what they had done, to live in the wreckage of their choices. And this was only the beginning. By the time I tracked Marcus down, his life was already unraveling. The investigation into his business was public knowledge, and the whispers about his affairs had made him a pariah among the people he'd once impressed. He was desperate, cornered, and clinging to what little remained of his hollow empire. It wasn't enough. I needed to face him, to look him in the eyes and remind him that he hadn't just stolen from me. He'd ripped apart the foundation of my life. I wanted him to understand the weight of his betrayal. But more than that, I wanted him to feel it. I found him at one of the bars he used to frequent, though now it was empty, save for a few indifferent patrons and the bartender who barely glanced his way. He sat hunched over a glass of whiskey, his once pristine suit wrinkled and ill-fitting, his eyes hollow. For a moment, I stood in the doorway, watching him. This was the man who had destroyed my family, who had smiled in my face while carving out a space for himself in my life. I thought I might feel satisfaction seeing him like this, broken and pathetic. But all I felt was fury. He didn't notice me until I was standing beside him. When he looked up, there was a flicker of recognition, then something else. Fear. He quickly masked it with a smirk, the same arrogant expression he always wore when he thought he had the upper hand. "Well, look who it is," he said, his voice slurring slightly. "Come to gloat." I didn't answer. Instead, I pulled out the chair across from him and sat down, my gaze never leaving his. "You don't look so good, Marcus," I said finally, my voice low and steady. He scoffed, leaning back in his seat. "You think you've won, don't you? This little game of yours, turning my clients against me, ruining my business. It's cute, really, but you're still the same loser, clinging to the life I took from you." The words were like gasoline on a fire. My fists clenched under the table, but I forced myself to stay calm. "The difference between you and me, Marcus, is that I build things. You leech off others until there's nothing left." He laughed bitterly, his bravado slipping for just a moment. "You think you're better than me? You couldn't even keep your wife happy. Hell, you couldn't even tell your son wasn't yours. What kind of man doesn't see that coming?" The room tilted. His words hit harder than I expected, reopening wounds I had barely managed to close. But he wasn't done. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "You want to know the truth? Ethan's better off without you. Sophia, too. They both needed a real man, not some workaholic idiot who couldn't see what was right in front of him." The air in the room seemed to freeze. My vision narrowed until all I saw was Marcus's smug face. The rage that had simmered for weeks boiled over, hot and uncontrollable. I stood so fast the chair scraped against the floor. Before I realized what I was doing, my fist connected with his jaw, sending him sprawling to the ground. He tried to scramble to his feet, but I grabbed him by the collar, dragging him up only to slam him against the bar. The bartender shouted something, but I didn't hear it. All I could hear was the pounding of my pulse in my ears. All I could see was Marcus's face twisted in pain. "You took everything from me?" I snarled, my voice shaking. "And you have the audacity to act like it's my fault?" Marcus winced, his laugh weak and shaky. "You're pathetic," he hissed. "No wonder she chose me." The second punch came without thought, driven by the kind of fury I didn't know I was capable of. He crumpled to the floor, clutching his face as the bartender grabbed the phone, shouting for the police. It was only then that I realized what I had done. I stepped back, my chest heaving, as Marcus lay groaning on the ground. The adrenaline began to fade, replaced by the weight of reality crashing down on me. I had lost control. When the police arrived minutes later, they found me standing there, my fists trembling, and Marcus slumped against the bar. I didn't resist as they cuffed me, their voices a distant hum as they read me my rights. As they led me outside, I caught a glimpse of Marcus, his face bruised but his smirk still intact. Even in his defeat, he had managed to drag me down with him. The trial was a blur of betrayal. Marcus played the victim, spinning the fight into a tale of survival, while Sophia twisted the knife deeper. On the stand, she spoke of my anger issues and painted herself as a woman terrified of her volatile husband. Their performance was flawless. The guilty verdict came swiftly, 3 years in prison. As the judge delivered my sentence, I glanced at Sophia and Marcus. She leaned toward him, her lips curving in a faint smile, completely unbothered by the destruction she had caused. Being led away in handcuffs, I finally understood the depth of her betrayal. She hadn't just taken my family. She had used my anger to bury me. But as fury churned in my chest, I promised myself one thing. This wouldn't be the end. Prison was a world of its own, harsh and unforgiving. It stripped away everything I had been, leaving only raw anger and pain. But anger wouldn't help me survive. It wouldn't get me out of this place stronger. So I turned my focus inward. The library became my sanctuary. I devoured books on finance, business strategy, and human psychology, sharpening my mind for the life I would rebuild. In the yard, I rebuilt my body, turning physical exertion into a way to channel my rage. Inmates with sharp minds but fallen fortunes taught me lessons no university ever could. How to negotiate under pressure. How to read people like a book. How to turn setbacks into opportunities. Every conversation, every skill learned became a stepping stone toward my transformation. Prison didn't break me, it forged me. The day I walked out, I had nothing. No home, no business, and no family to return to. Sophia had taken it all. But she hadn't taken my will. The first call I made after prison was to Liam. He had stuck by me through everything, visiting when he could and constantly reminding me of who I used to be, and who I could become again. He didn't hesitate when I told him my plan. Within a week, Liam helped me secure a small loan to get started. It wasn't much, but it was enough to rent a modest workspace and buy the tools I needed. I threw myself into the work, applying the strategies I'd studied in prison and drawing on the lessons from my past. It started small, personalized logistics solutions for local businesses. Word spread quickly. People trusted me because I delivered on every promise, every deadline. I reinvested every cent I made, slowly expanding the business. Liam was there every step of the way, his steady presence a reminder that loyalty still existed in the world. Within a year, the business had grown beyond what I'd imagined. It wasn't just a paycheck. It was proof that I could rise from the ashes of my old life. But my success wasn't just for me. It was a quiet message to those who thought they destroyed me. I wasn't just surviving. I was winning. It was a coincidence, really. I hadn't thought about Sophia in months, my focus fully on expanding the business. By then, things had taken off beyond anything I'd dreamed of. The contracts were bigger, the clients more prestigious. For the first time in years, I could breathe, knowing I was on solid ground. No, not just solid ground. I was standing on top of the world. The moment I saw her, though, the past came rushing back. I was sitting at an upscale cafe downtown, reviewing a proposal for a new logistics hub. The cafe wasn't my usual spot, but I'd been drawn there for a meeting with a potential investor. She walked in, her once confident stride replaced by something hesitant, almost timid. Her hair was pulled back, but not with the same effortlessness she used to have. Her clothes, while clean, lacked the polish and luxury she once flaunted. She looked around, distracted, until her eyes landed on me. Her face froze, and for a moment, I saw something flicker, recognition, shock, maybe even shame. She hesitated, as if debating whether to approach, but I had already seen her. There was no hiding now. She came closer, clutching her purse like it was her only lifeline. "Ryan?" she asked, her voice shaky. I set the proposal down slowly, taking my time to meet her gaze. "Sophia." She glanced at the papers on the table, at the tailored suit I now wore, at the air of success that surrounded me. I didn't need to say a word. She could see it. "You're doing well," she murmured, her eyes betraying her disbelief. I leaned back in my chair, keeping my expression neutral. "You could say that." The business grew faster than I expected. A few good investments helped. It's been an interesting couple of years. Her face faltered, the weight of her own circumstances pulling her shoulders down. She didn't need to tell me about her life. I could see it in the way she avoided my eyes, in the slight tremble of her hands. Marcus had left her. That much was obvious. Whatever plans she had made with him had crumbled, leaving her to pick up the pieces. And from the look of her, there hadn't been much to salvage. "Ryan," she said quietly, her voice laced with desperation, I need help. Things have been hard." "Ethan?" She hesitated, trying to pull at my emotions. "He needs stability." "I thought maybe you could." I cut her off, my tone calm but firm. "You thought I could what, Sophia? Forget everything you did?" Pretend you didn't stand by Marcus while he destroyed me? She flinched, her lower lip trembling. I made mistakes, I know that. But you don't understand. Marcus left me with nothing. He used me. And Ethan. Her voice broke as she clung to the one connection she thought might sway me. Ethan still loves you. He needs you. For a moment, her words pierced through my armor. I thought of Ethan, of the boy I had loved like my own, who had no part in the choices his mother had made. But then I looked at her, this woman who had once stood beside me, only to stab me in the back, and the anger returned. I stood, gathering my papers. Ethan deserves better than what you've given him. But as for you, Sophia, you made your bed. Now you get to lie in it. Her eyes filled with tears as she reached for my arm. But I stepped back, my voice steady. Don't contact me again. As I walked away, I didn't feel triumph or satisfaction. I felt nothing at all. She had become a ghost of her former self, a reminder of the life I had left behind. And while she struggled to hold on to what little she had, I had rebuilt my world. I was no longer the man she had betrayed. I was the man she couldn't reach, no matter how much she tried. Sophia's desperation didn't fade after our encounter at the cafe. She escalated, leaving voicemails, showing up uninvited, pleading for money. It wasn't just her financial ruin that drove her. It was her fear of losing everything, including Ethan. But by then, I had learned the full extent of her neglect. Ethan, the boy I had once loved as my own, had suffered under her care. Reports came to me through mutual acquaintances. Stories of Sophia disappearing for days, leaving him alone with nothing but frozen meals and silence. There were bruises, too, signs of her frustration taken out on the one person who couldn't fight back. I filed for custody immediately, armed with the evidence of her neglect and abuse, and with Ethan's well-being as my driving force, I took her to court. She fought at first, but it was clear to everyone, including the judge, that she wasn't fit to raise a child. The ruling came swiftly. Full parental rights granted to me, and Sophia stripped of any legal claim to Ethan. The day the papers were finalized, I sat Ethan down, trying to explain the situation in a way that wouldn't hurt him further. He was hesitant at first, clinging to the idea of his mother despite everything. But slowly, he began to open up about what life had been like with her. The nights she forgot to feed him, the times she raised her hand when he cried too much, the constant fear he had lived in. "Are you mad at me for saying that about her?" he asked, his small voice trembling. I pulled him into a hug, holding him tightly. "Never," I said. "You've been so brave, Ethan. You deserve to feel safe and loved. Always." And he did. Over time, he began to heal, smiling more often, laughing freely. The final step was Viana, the woman who had quietly entered my life as an employee but had become so much more. She had a gentle strength, a kindness that drew Ethan to her immediately. She treated him like her own from the moment they met, and before long, he started calling her Mom. Adopting Ethan as our own was the easiest decision I ever made. The day the judge granted it, Ethan grinned ear to ear, his small hand clutching both of ours as we walked out of the courthouse. "I'm happy," he said simply, his voice light but resolute. "I miss her sometimes, but I like being here, with you." Hearing those words was the real victory.